Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
Along with Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur for another edition of Protected Speech. And we got a big one today, just because Jonathan has broken a pretty sizable story here before we film this episode. And I want to get right to the topic because it's an AAPI hate-related story, but it's one that has multiple dynamics that are unique. Jonathan, why don't you explain it to folks before we play the clips?
Yeah, big story coming out of Seattle. A heinous incident over the weekend where an Asian woman is confronted by a black woman who spews out these disgusting, nasty racial slurs in her direction. So we can just listen to the clip right now.
I don't give a f.
You're racist? That's what you said?
That's what I said.
What did you say?
It's not against the law. You heard what I said. Go eat your dog with some rice.
She said, go eat your dog with some rice.
That's what I said. Go eat your dog with some rice. That's what I said. It's not against the law. Retarded. Record our match.
What did I say? You said go eat your dog with some rice?
Yeah.
Yeah, post that.
Yeah, post that. Make sure you get me good, Hope.
Oh, I did. You don't look good, but I
Go back
did.
to your country. Go do some
And
nails
your kid is laughing at you being
Go
racist.
do some nails or some feet or something. I'll make a nail appointment for Lena. You'll be a long time.
So that clip exploded, and then there was a response video that Stephanie posted. Let's take a look at that.
So this happened at the Shell on Madison, right across from Trader Joe's in Capitol Hill, Seattle. And if you know that gas station, you know that it's owned by an Asian family. So it's usually one of three Asian men who are working there. And yesterday, when this happened, it was the elderly Asian man, like the grandpa, you know, very sweet, very quiet. This lady that I was recording, we had walked in at pretty much the same time. He was already helping someone like with a transaction, and there was someone else waiting behind him. So I like get in line like a normal person. And so the way that this gas station is set up is like the counter is right there when you open the door. So she kind of opens the door halfway and she tells him like, I need $6 on pump 1, whatever. And he's like in the middle of a transaction, so he can't like help her right away. And there's a line, right? So she, I guess, gets frustrated. I don't know. Not even 3 seconds later, she throws the cash in his face. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating. She throws, and like aggressively too, over the plastic barrier, hits his face. So at that point, I'm shocked. He doesn't say anything. So naturally, something about me is whenever I see people being rude to elderly Asian people in public, it triggers something in me. I can't deal with it. I can't stand it. I need to speak up. Especially if they don't speak up for themselves, I will do it for them. I go, whoa, don't do that. That's extremely rude. Why would you do that to anyone? You don't throw money in anyone's face, especially when they're working customer service. And she goes, mind your own fucking business, da-da-da-da-da, and walks out. So I pay for what I pay for, and then I walk out. She immediately starts with the racial slurs. In my head, I'm like, okay, you just probably don't like Asian people because what happened in the gas station, and then now you're yelling racial slurs at me. So I go, oh, okay, so you're just racist. Gotcha. And she goes, yeah, I am racist, blah, 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 blah. And that's when I start recording. So, yeah, pretty much everything that happened. And then I recorded her up until the point she left. So, yeah, no, I was not racist towards her. I know better than that. I am not going to stoop to her level of disgustingness. And, yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of part 2, where the first clip goes viral. Stephanie reacts, and then one Mr. Jonathan Choe decides to intervene as well. And before we get Jonathan's reaction, I think we just got to play the clip of Jonathan now trying to find out the other side of the story as he goes and meets this lady at her place of residence.
What are you doing?
Hi, are you LaDonna?
I am.
Ma'am, I just, have you seen the video of you hurling all those racial slurs? I'm a journalist. I just wanted to know, get your side of the story.
I don't got no side of the story. Why are you on our property?
Do you regret using all those racial slurs? You don't. Would you like to say anything?
The police, why are you recording my car?
Would you like to share your side of the story, ma'am?
Why are you on my property and why are you recording my car?
If you just come down and talk to me, I'll leave.
I don't have to talk to you. I don't know you.
I'm a local journalist to see if you wanted to share.
I don't give a who you are.
You want to share your side of the story?
You heard it, didn't you?
I wanted to just give you an opportunity.
Why are you on my property recording my...
Well, I'm on a public street, ma'am. Would you like to just share your side of the story? Do you have any regrets hurling all of those racial slurs at that Asian woman?
I have to come and talk to you about nothing.
I know, but you know your video.
Out of here.
But your video's everywhere.
I don't give a...
Would you like to just come down and maybe apologize?
For what?
For all those racial slurs.
No, that called me a... Go ask her that. So you and her.
Do you have evidence of that? Do you have evidence of that?
What the are you doing,
I want to wait for you to come down to talk.
You'll be waiting till Jesus come back.
You don't...
Who the are you? I don't have to answer to you. You and her. Now post that.
Anything else, ma'am, you'd like to share?
Yes. Like the I said. Called me a...
I don't... She yelled all these racial slurs at an Asian woman.
In the back of my house recording.
She was caught on video.
Who gives the...
LaDonna, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say you.
Are you a racist?
There's an Asian man here recording my car and my children and like talking about he's a journalist. You need to get off the property. Get the out of my...
Woo!
Get your on. That's what I thought.
LaDonna! Why are you throwing rocks at me? Why are you throwing rocks? I just want your side of the story. LaDonna, stop throwing rocks.
Eat it, Asian man. Or a dog with rice. You know how I know.
So there you have it. Hopefully full context about what we're talking about on this episode, at least.
You can't make this stuff up, man.
Yeah, I mean, let me just get your reaction because I don't know if there's been another venue to get your full reaction. Again, you didn't want to be part of the story. You were just trying to get her side of the story, but very clearly you got into the middle of the mix.
Yeah, look, you can't make this stuff up. This is Asian hate. It's alive and well. It's happening all across the country, and it's just not being reported. And I happen to seize on this moment because clearly I saw this instance of this video, going viral. I posted it, and I realized I had to get, I had to get this story, and at the very least, I had to make an attempt to get the multiple sides here. So, just to be clear, Stephanie, the Asian woman, I spoke to her exclusively. I actually did a piece for the Post Millennial, and that's on the website right now, where you can see my one-on-one interview with her. But Stephanie, who doesn't want me to use her last name, it's because she's dealing with retaliation now. Even though Stephanie is the victim here, clearly you hear all these racial slurs being hurled at her. There are people online now who think that Stephanie instigated this or isn't telling the full story. And again, the reason why Stephanie got involved, according to her version of events, is that she was going into the Shell gas station in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, and she saw LaDonna Ritchie, the black woman in the video, allegedly being rude to the elderly Korean associate behind the counter in the Shell gas station. And LaDonna allegedly aggressively throws money in the direction of this Asian man because she didn't want to wait in line to pump her gas. And Stephanie then calls her out and says, "That's rude. What are you doing?" And then, of course, the conversation spills out into the street. And that's when Stephanie hits record. And that's when you hear all this vile, insane, just every racial slur that triggers Asians possible. So the video don't lie, man.
I mean, there's so many different things that I was feeling in each video, right? It's just stunning. The first video is just remarkable for the sheer brazenness of the language and just really no blanks given by LaDonna, right? Just there's no repercussions. We've seen people charged with hate speech, but, typically maybe they're spitting in someone's direction. We've been covering all these AAPI hate crimes for some time now, but there was no assault necessarily. It was just verbal abuse, which is protected speech. At the same time, LaDonna then, in reaction to you confronting her, did throw a rock, which escalated things to a different level. I don't know if you feel like you want to press charges. I don't even know where this is going, frankly. All I know is that this thing has gone completely bonkers viral between these multiple videos. And now you're part of the
more than, as of now, nearly 600,000 views, my encounter, and in total, I think all the videos that have been viewed now more than 1 million times. This is a significant story, man. And I didn't want to be part of this story, but people are now accusing me of instigating, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to get the other side of the story. That's what journalists do, Ravi. If we see it.
I mean, look, if there's anything about the theme of this particular show, if you see the clips at the beginning of the show, Jonathan and I are both aggressive journalists. We go about things a little bit differently. But I think if there's a theme and there's a simpatico between the two of us, is that unfortunately we're in a place now where politicians and folks that we hold accountable don't want to be in the spotlight, right? So they've been running and hiding during COVID. And, you've got to be in your face. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors that you don't get to. And in this case, you went to a source. Now, LaDonna's not a public figure, but she did something very publicly here to insult Stephanie, who apparently was just standing up for the ownership and the staff of that gas station. I want to ask you about that, Jonathan. Is there any video footage of this Asian man, I guess the employee there at the gas station, of the money being thrown at his face? Any audio potentially of LaDonna or Stephanie saying something on site beyond what Stephanie filmed herself?
Well, just to be clear, yes. So I had a chance to review the surveillance video inside provided by the owner, and the entire encounter is captured inside, but there's no audio that's really audible, right? You just hear, the cash register, some ambient noise. So if there was any type of N-word or any type of racial slurs, thrown out by Stephanie in the direction of, this black woman, hey, that wasn't picked up. But all the store clerks will say on the record that they never heard Stephanie yell any type of racial slur, let alone the N-word. And just to be clear, Stephanie says that this woman aggressively threw money in the direction of this store clerk. So that was picked up on camera, but I don't think this woman threw any cash at this store clerk's face.
Okay, so Stephanie witnessed the money being thrown aggressively, not necessarily at someone's face.
Right, and I saw the surveillance video myself. However, the surveillance video outside, that doesn't exist, according to the store owner. So, again, for the record, it appears that no racial slurs or N-word was thrown about inside the Shell gas station, but when the conversation spilled outside, there's no surveillance video of that. So I haven't been able to corroborate any of that via surveillance. But again, when you have multiple witnesses, by all accounts, they're saying that, again, the racial slurs thrown out by Stephanie allegedly never happened.
Where does the story go, Jonathan? Because I know, obviously, you broke this thing like wide open. It's been picked up by certain media outlets. But interestingly enough, it has not been picked up. And you pointed this out. You know, you're the best reporter in Seattle by far of the major networks there. Now that you're on your own, these folks haven't picked up the story. I mean, I understand it's not a conventional situation, right? You have a black woman yelling at an Asian woman, but I mean, the fact that you did the story, is there a reason they're not really covering it in Seattle?
You got to ask them. I don't know. I'm not in the minds of these news directors and decision makers, but here's what I do know. This is an instance of Asian hate. It's an instance of Asian hate. That's the bottom line. It may not be a quote unquote Asian hate crime, but it's an example of Asian hate. And these types of incidents are happening all the time. They're just not being reported. And clearly in this case, not being reported on. And that's why I decided to pursue it, because to me, it's a clear-cut case of racism. And, you know, this woman, LaDonna Ritchie, was going to get away with it. And she had to be held accountable as well for her behavior and actions, because, you know, I think the saddest part about this whole story, you know, aside from the fact that Stephanie was a victim of some horrendous, you know, racial slurs, you know, hurled in her direction. The fact that LaDonna, even though I gave her numerous opportunities, didn't apologize, had zero remorse, didn't recognize the harm that it caused the community. I feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for LaDonna. And on top of that, Stephanie brought up a good point, and so did many others on social media. LaDonna Ritchie did this in front of her young children, her sons. They saw all of this. What does that signal to them? You know, and I think it's just a sad situation.
And I understand when you were there on site, there was another, I guess, a neighbor of LaDonna trying to help navigate the situation. Explain that, because I really want to get the full context so we have at least a record of what really took place.
Well, yeah. Obviously, with all the yelling, one neighbor came out and it was a white woman. And, you know, I hate to stereotype, so I'll do my best not to. But, you know, I knew immediately what her leanings were like. Capitol Hill, if I were to use broad brushstrokes, tends to lean more left and, you know, liberal. And that's perfectly fine. But this, you know, white neighbor essentially accused me of harassing LaDonna. Even though this white woman heard LaDonna hurling racial slurs and insults at me. And the irony in all of this is that LaDonna called the police. I saw her, at least, and you saw that in the video, calling the police. But this white woman kept telling LaDonna, don't call the police, don't call the police. We don't need the police. Obviously, for, you know, our viewers, you know, the left, especially in Seattle, the far left, they led the way to defund the Seattle Police Department. So you have kind of this anti-police sentiment there. Ironically, this black woman is calling the police on me, claiming that I'm harassing her. So there are all these nuances and backstories here. But once again, it goes back to Stephanie, ultimately, who is the victim here, but now online is dealing with some vitriol and hate, you know, pointed at her because people don't believe her story or believe that she may have done something to instigate this situation. And in some cases, you know, calling LaDonna the N-word. And of course, Stephanie has denied that. The store clerks say that never happened. And again, I've asked LaDonna point blank, if it happened, show the evidence. You know, she's got a cell phone too. You saw her taking out her cell phone, right, Ravi? And taking photos of me. And I got nothing to hide. I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, so I guess my final question to you is, what recourse does LaDonna have here? Yourself, since you're in the middle of this, Stephanie, and the folks at the gas station. I mean, where is this going? Is this going anywhere?
Look, Stephanie wants to move on. She gave me the exclusive interview because she told me, and it's in my story for the Post Millennial, that if she didn't speak up, you know, she didn't want to set this precedent again. The stereotype that Asian Americans are quiet, keep to ourselves, don't speak up, and she didn't want to fit that kind of model minority myth. So she spoke up and wanted to go on the record, and she did. I thought she did an admirable job because in the end, she also said that, hey, if it was a black person being berated or treated rudely by an Asian person, she would have intervened and stepped in as well and called that person out. And I believe her. The store clerk, they thanked Stephanie for stepping up when others didn't. And by the way, there were others there that day who didn't say anything. They just watched, I'm sure, in horror or just moved on with their day, right? That's most bystanders, right? Just don't want to get involved. So Stephanie really deemed to be courageous in this case. As for LaDonna, I have no idea what she's going to do. She's got to face the consequences. I have no idea what she does for a living. I want to be very clear. We haven't outed her in terms of where she lives, her home address. I don't want her to deal with any unintended consequences. I hope she can. This is a teachable moment, though. She maybe looks back and recognizes, hey, you can't just say whatever you want, that there are consequences. And the fact that she just totally obliterated this entire Asian American community in Seattle. And again, given numerous opportunities to simply say, hey, I messed up, I'm sorry. That apology, that remorse, that contrite, attitude could have gone such a long way and could have possibly even, been an opportunity to bridge some of the divides in the community that aren't really talked about between Blacks and Asians right now, especially in the past couple of years. We've seen these videos, right? These viral videos of, Asian seniors and elders and women getting just beat up on the streets. And unfortunately, in a lot of these videos in urban settings, in these big major cities like San Francisco and New York, the perpetrators are Black men or Black women, or Hispanic men or Hispanic women. So, this is, again, it's not an easy story to cover. There's so many dynamics, but it had to be told. And this goes back to even why we're talking about this right now, why we have to focus on this, because we can't rely on the mainstream media to preserve, let alone tell our stories. And if I'm not telling this story, I've said this numerous times, it's almost like it never happened.
Well, certainly if you did not aggressively pursue LaDonna's side of the story, at least, and then you can kind of get a sense of what she's all about. I mean, it wasn't just an isolated incident. I mean, she most certainly gave you a diatribe that you probably won't forget, and certainly throwing the rock.
Rock at me, man.
I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. I know you're frustrated.
My career, by the way.
That was a bit much. That was a bit much. All right, we're going to move on to another topic, maybe less contentious, unless you are someone that had an account at FTX, because that whole thing has dissolved in a manner that I don't think anyone could have anticipated a month ago, though there are a few people online, certainly on Twitter and certain places, that say, hey, look out for FTX. Maybe it's a house of cards. But certainly they were considered by all the experts in cryptocurrency that was the kind of Fort Knox, or the fortress in that space. And now clearly this whole thing has imploded. And I think one of the angles we've been pursuing is the story of Nishad Singh, who was an executive at both Alameda as well as at FTX. Nishad Singh, who was the director of engineering, actually is someone we profiled a decade ago on Diya TV. He got a $543 million loan through this process. And of course, Sam Bankman-Fried, who was the CEO, and has now since been removed, he got a $1 billion loan. So I know, Jonathan, we've both been following this story. I just want to get your thoughts on Nishad Singh, and also we'll talk about Ramnik Arora, who's kind of lesser known, but also part of that inner circle. Ramnik Arora, another Indian American guy, he was the one getting Sam Bankman-Fried into the inner circle of Sequoia Capital, one of the most revered venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, notoriously known for being very hard on founders, willing to kick a founder out of their own startup if they're not doing the job. Well, somehow Sequoia didn't see this FTX scandal coming. They lost hundreds of millions of dollars, apparently.
Yeah,
so it's a heck of a story.
Teachers pension fund. I mean, there's so much. The due diligence just didn't happen on so many levels. But I was looking down here. I wanted to quickly read this. FTX's interim CEO says never in his career has he seen such complete failure of corporate controls and a complete absence of trustworthy financial information. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because it was unable to come up with customer funds. I don't know, man. This all signs indicate this was either a massive Ponzi scheme. Again, I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything. It's all still under investigation. Or at the very least, if we were giving them the benefit of the doubt, just total failure in terms of management.
And we've covered the story on a previous episode. and we did focus on Sam Bankman-Fried's political expenditures, right? Namely to the Democratic Party. But he had a colleague.
Republicans also took money.
Correct. Yeah, as I was about to explain, FTX had another executive that gave a ton of money to the GOP. So it did seem like they were greasing the wheel on both sides of the aisle, which, by the way, is the way to get ahead if you are going to be potentially regulated. Just to let you know why your cable bill has been so high. Certain cable companies have been greasing the wheel with 100 lobbyists, in a certain town or two and capital cities around the country. The reason we have monopolies or duopolies throughout this country is that we have politicians that do take cash from corporations, from special interests, and here we are in another situation where you would think that Sam Bankman-Fried and all of his colleagues would be on the run, right? Theoretically, the feds would be involved. But there was a video that just came out where SBF is hanging out in the Bahamas still. Like, he's just hanging out at his apartment complex. Now, it's still very early stage. We don't know where this is going, but it's pretty remarkable that this could be bigger than what Bernie Madoff did, bigger than all these, Enron, bigger than Enron. And yet these guys are still kind of roaming around in the wind. It's kind of amazing to watch.
Yeah, I don't know what to say except this is happening real time. We don't know where this is going to go. But like you said, this FTX cryptocurrency exchange collapse, it has so many different tentacles in different aspects of society. And it is fair to say right now that FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried and the rest of his team, they were trying to become the 800-pound gorilla in this space and really get ahead. And like you said, in America, you need the support of politicians on both sides of the aisle. You need to come off as, again, being an industry leader, above reproach. But again, when you look behind the curtain, what you saw was a company that was built on sand, and it just collapsed. And in many cases, again, if the reports are true, they were gambling with their clients' money. And that's why there was this, this bank run when the rumors came out that FTX was potentially, messing around with investor money. Other investors said, oh, man, I've seen this play out before. I'm taking my money out. And when, everyone started heading for the doors all at once, this is what happens.
Well, and this is why a lot of people in the crypto industry are trying to push back and saying, hey, we're creating real products. But the reality is everything has been suppressed. I mean, even something like Bitcoin that was, incredibly successful has just dropped to lows, and confidence has been shaken. And this is true of not just all these different cryptocurrencies, but it's true of the other firms in the space, whether it's a Binance, whether it's a Coinbase. People are worried about the solvency of
Bitcoin
these.
At one point at its high was trading like at just insane amounts, like at $67,000 or something like that in the 60s. Right now it's down to basically 16 grand a Bitcoin. And I mean, it's the word that keeps going around is like contagion, right? What's going to happen to the rest of the cryptocurrency industry and every other player involved with blockchain, that underlying technology that everyone is touting, and all the other involved, spaces like the NFTs, right? These non-fungible tokens that were going for record prices, people paying millions of dollars for these NFTs, this digital art. This is crazy, man. And it's all poof, up in smoke.
Well, I mean, that's the way some of these things go, and we will continue to follow the story. But Nishad Singh certainly has made a name for himself. I mean, a young man we profiled a decade ago, not knowing where his career would go. Here he obviously hit the big time. And
what was he going to do with the $500 million loan? That's what I want to know. What did he do with it? Where's that money?
Well, that's the real question that we've talked about this before the show. If you got $500 million as a quote unquote loan, what would you do with it? I mean,
what do you do with $500 million?
I mean, you basically, I would say, buy a sports franchise. I don't know what you would do. For me, maybe it's buy a TV network. But I mean, the reality is, I mean, I think it's one of these like ridiculous luxury situations, but it was a loan. So are the shareholders going to be asking to have this thing clawed back?
Clawed back? Now that the companies file for Chapter 11, do they even have to pay it back? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I don't know financial law.
Yeah, it's a loan, which is very different than a distribution. And so, because, all these guys had a lot of equity in this firm, and it did not go public, which is different than, say, Coinbase, which is a publicly traded company in the United States. And so there are folks pushing back and say, hey, not all crypto is sketchy, but this story will continue. Let's go back to Seattle now, Jonathan. I skipped over a story that I do want you to talk about, another original story about Turco's last stand. Tell folks about what you uncovered.
Oh, man, you can't make this stuff up. Seattle is the gift that keeps on giving. I've been working on a series since the summer called Seattle's Unending Drug Crisis, and I've been focusing on this intersection in downtown Seattle, 3rd and Pike. This is where just a block away from the world-famous Pike Place Market, where you've seen the images of the fish being thrown and caught by the fishermen out there. It's a great spot for tourists. It's beautiful. It's right on the water, but just a few blocks away, you have this, again, drug den, black market of stolen goods where people are just using drugs, left and right. And it's gotten so bad now. There are so many business, again, in this downtown core, now boarded up, this property shuttered. And there are only a handful now of corporate companies there, like a Ross Stores, a Chipotle, a Walgreens, and this one tiny newsstand called Turco's Last Stand. And the owner came to me and said, Jonathan, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I'm begging the city to do something about the drug use, the drug dealers, the black market. Literally, you have people stealing items from stores and selling them at this corner. And this business owner, his name's Ben Gant, and you see him right here. He's like, I don't know what else this is going to take. How do you run a business in Seattle? So I'll be launching that story in depth in the coming days. But again, this is just a preview. But the video, the images, the people doing drugs, the meth and fentanyl in plain sight. As I've said numerous times, we're losing a generation. Why isn't homelessness? Why isn't the drug epidemic one of the top 3 issues for the White House? That's what I want to know. Why aren't we talking about more as a nation? Why do we think it's just confined to these West Coast cities like a Portland or a Seattle or a San Francisco, when this is actually, happening in pockets across the country? It's just more amplified in these places. So again, I'm talking about that. The reason why I'm really covering this is because no one else is. Once again, there's a theme here. This is not stuff that's easy to watch. It's not stuff that's easy to gather. If I'm not covering this, we can't hold our public officials accountable, the policymakers who are allowing this to continue on our streets.
I mean, honestly, I grew up in small business. My parents actually had, restaurants and with storefronts, and I have great empathy for folks that are going out there every day, opening up their shop and, building a business and hiring folks. And, it's not just Seattle. It's obviously many cities around the country. I guess I know you've been covering this thing for a couple of years now, but is there any hope? Because I know they've had sweeps. I know they've had street cleanings. They've had folks moved out, and they've had some
police making arrests. They're police moving people on, but they all keep coming back. So it requires really a true culture change. It starts with enforcement. These criminals, these addicts, again, I want to be careful. I'm not saying all addicts are criminals, and I'm not saying that all the homeless are criminals, but in many cases, they're victims, right? The criminals prey on them. The drug dealers know where they're at, so they come to them a la carte, straight up right there, concierge delivery. So it really comes down to the policies that we have in place, our city council, the defund the police movement, our prosecutors, and the judges. They all have to work in concert, and the message clearly has to be sent that this is no longer going to be tolerated. And I think just over the past few years, and COVID didn't help, right? Where it was pretty much a free-for-all, but we're moving on from COVID now, and we've got to really scrutinize and take a look at what's going on in our cities, especially, again, your city, San Francisco, my city, Seattle. I think the problems, you see it on your streets as well. And they're, the similarities, the root causes, the problems are all the same. So there's something there.
It's a serious issue. I mean, let's face it, we just had an election, and the district attorney, the previous one was kicked out. The one that was brought in as an interim DA was actually officially elected by the constituency, so they like the direction she's taking San Francisco. But San Francisco needs a lot of work. The last couple of years, it was just kind of a free-for-all, and that's a problem. And tourism is a huge part of San Francisco's economy. It's always been one of these great convention cities, of the hubs of one of the crown jewels of this nation, and it's been in huge disrepair the last couple of years. So what you're seeing in Seattle is
the butt of jokes. Same thing with Seattle, you know. And this is America, and you got to call it the way you see it. That's what I do with my reporting. These are turning into America's slums. You know, I've interviewed numerous people on the ground, you know, volunteers now helping at these homeless encampments. And I interviewed this Indian American, you know, software guy, and he was out there helping with the homeless and the cleanup. And I asked him straight up, have you seen anything like this type of poverty? And he said, yeah, actually, I have in India. But I said, oh, wow, really? That's interesting perspective. But he goes, there's a difference. And I said, what's that? And he goes, in America, you have this being fueled by the drug crisis. Fentanyl, needles everywhere. He goes, in India, we don't see this type of drug epidemic. We don't see this harm reduction. We don't see these needles and crack pipes being given out for free. It is just so complicated right now. We don't see this decriminalization of, you know, possession of hard narcotics like cocaine and fentanyl and meth in these, you know, Pacific Northwest cities like Portland and Seattle. And it's, again, become a free-for-all. It's this culture, right? The criminals, the addicts, they know that. So they come to these cities. Wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, these lives are being destroyed, and that's the worst part, right? You see, when you see, like, young people, right? I mean, I've seen images of, like, young people who ostensibly look healthy, and they get hooked in some kind of drug, and boom, they're on the street. And it's just awful.
The dealers, the Mexican cartels, the suppliers who provide the ingredients from China, they all know that. They don't care. America is being destroyed with this drug epidemic, and it is a major reason why we have a homeless crisis that continues to get worse and worse in America.
All right, I want to take this in a different direction, going to a story that we've covered here as well. And this is a man that has a huge following, maybe even a bigger following than you got, Jonathan. Online, a guy named Rajiv Malhotra. He's a very well-known academic and author, a guy who was actually in the tech field, retired in his mid-40s, and decided to start a nonprofit and focus on issues focused on his spiritual path, which is Hinduism. And so he's an Indian man that's been in the United States for 50 years. He lives by Princeton, New Jersey, and got very involved in just how the Indian narrative was being shaped in the United States. He used to sponsor things like the Harvard India Conference. And what he discovered over time is that there were all these professors and folks that were getting funded by people like him and other industrialists from India. And the academics were taking a very harsh tactic towards India. And I think what his problem was not that there was criticism, but in the way that they've gone about it. He thought it was kind of a disingenuous act that was going on, to the point where all these academics around the country were fueling negative narratives about India and about Hindus and Hinduism. And so he started to unravel what was going on, and he's become kind of a persona non grata amongst really the academic left, and they've kind of branded him as a right-winger, even though, you know, in my conversation with him, he says, look, there's some things that I have a left-wing viewpoint on, and others that I have a right-wing viewpoint on. But again, in this world where you get branded a certain way, if you decide to go against a group, he's definitely been kind of that public enemy number one. And so I had a chance to sit down for him. I mean, he's very well known on YouTube. You know, has written, I think, 9 books to date. His latest book is called Snakes in the Gunga. He went on a world tour, but he happened to stop by Silicon Valley. So we're going to play a quick clip of this interview I had with Rajiv Malhotra. Let's talk about your latest book before we get into your career. You've got a new book called Snakes in the Gunga. Talk about why you decided to write this particular book.
So the book is on the latest things that are affecting the world, not just India, but the United States also. And that is this whole wokeism culture, which is a derivative of Marxism. People don't want to admit that, but it is. Marxism and postmodernism applied to race in America became critical race theory. Now, that's fine because I have sympathy with the blacks and they suffered a lot and they need some help, and I'm fully on board. But then the problem is when they started mapping it onto India and started saying that the caste hierarchy is a race hierarchy. And so if you belong to a certain community, then it's racism. Actually, caste is also not an Indian term. It's a Portuguese term. It's a European idea. The caste system, what we now call caste system, was developed by Lord Risley, and then he turned it into his caste censuses. There used to be a Varna and a Jati system, which is quite flexible, very different. So in this book, there's a huge chapter on the history of Varna, Jati, and how it became caste. And so now that they've essentialized caste as though it's a eternal, permanent fixture from the very beginning of our tradition, they've started calling it racism. And then there's this whole movement called dismantle Hinduism, because Hinduism is racist. So obviously, if it were racist, then it would be a good idea to dismantle it. So this is a whole nefarious agenda. And Harvard is the epicenter of the logic, the theory, the research being done. Because of its brand name, it can get away with a lot of stuff that's not substantiated. So we are pointing out all the flaws in some of the important work done at Harvard.
So that was a quick excerpt of my conversation with Rajiv Malhotra. Obviously very charismatic, interesting guy, has some controversial takes that folks don't necessarily like to hear, but they do feel like they want to challenge him. But certainly his narrative has expanded. I mean, he's basically been like kind of a one-man band, so to speak, where he's been fighting this thing for decades, did not get support from the Indian government, did not get support from Indian Americans living here, most of whom are just trying to make a living, put their kids through school, and don't want to get into these battles. I mean, we've talked about this Asian American woman who stuck her neck out and then she got blowback, at a gas station. Most Indian Americans have kind of just kept their head down and they don't want to get involved in politics. They don't want to get involved in anything that could deviate from their purpose. But Rajiv Malhotra decided to stick his neck out. And now he's become, frankly, world famous, but he certainly gets his shots in the back as well. And so very interesting conversation. You can check the whole thing out on Diya TV's YouTube channel. But, he's hitting on some of these hot button issues that we have discussed on this program in the past. And I know it's something that's going to continue to come up as things evolve.
Yeah, and that's what happens to these pioneers, right? He's obviously a man who marches to the beat of his own drummer. And if you go back to the way pioneers end up, they're the first ones out, but they're also the first ones to get cut down. And I'm sure he's had many lonely, days where he felt as though he's the only guy, following his convictions, right? While he's trying to fight for the community and their voice. And he's looking around and no one's standing with him, right? And yet he's, following, again, his path and his convictions. And, I respect what he's doing at the end of the day, because, again, this is what he believes in. If he believes in it, this is his mission. And, I believe that, at the end of the day, if this is the truth, others will eventually see it.
I mean, he certainly has put his name out there, and he tries to back it up. And he said, frankly, if you notice, he dropped the name Harvard. He made one point in this clip, which I thought was interesting. He says that nobody really criticizes Harvard. And if you look at it, I mean, Harvard is one of those venues where everybody wants to be part of it. Okay, maybe you go there and
especially if you're Asian American. Especially if you're Asian American. So why would you criticize a place you want to go?
Most certainly, and we've covered Harvard for other reasons recently.
Yeah, Americans are suing Harvard now for discrimination.
Right, absolutely. And so he's like, Harvard doesn't get any criticism for their behavior, but what he's saying is it is the bastion where all of this rhetoric against, in a sense, against his native country, India, against his faith, which is Hinduism, it starts and ends with Harvard and gets spread. And so there's one academic who I've actually met because, Diya TV has sponsored the Harvard India Conference. And we had no idea, frankly, when we got started like 10 years ago. we had no idea about some of the stuff under the surface, right? We just take people at face value. It's nice to be out there in the community. We sponsor a ton of community events all over the country. I mean, we're doing one in December in Florida. We do stuff in Silicon Valley all the time. I mean, you name it, we try to get our brand out there. And so certainly with Harvard, we thought, hey, this would be a great opportunity. They have great speakers. They bring in government officials. They bring in all kinds of folks. But this was an underlying thing. And again, we got started at Harvard before the Modi era. So obviously things have changed once Prime Minister Modi got into office. And so you've seen the evolution. You see the rhetoric turn up, because there are a lot of folks that just don't like Prime Minister Modi and his party, the BJP. And so because of that, Rajiv Malhotra has become a target, and certainly folks inclined to go with Modi and his viewpoints are targets of this environment. So there's one academic who I've met, very nice fellow, Sir Jengde, had a very nice conversation, but he's a PhD. He was at least, I think, a doctoral student or a postdoctoral person there at Harvard, has written extensively about caste. And Rajiv said flat out on this interview that he wants to do a one-on-one with Sir Jengde, who's a huge critic of Hindus and Hinduism specifically. I mean, he'd like to see, if I'm not paraphrasing him correctly, please correct me, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't want Hinduism to exist effectively. And so this is where you have, one guy on one side of the aisle and another guy on the other side. And so Rajiv asked me to moderate. I've actually told Harvard this week I'd be happy to moderate that panel. We'll see if it comes to fruition, because there is a conference in February of 2023 in person for the first time in a couple of years at the Harvard India Conference. So we hope to be there, and hopefully I'll get a chance to start to actually build this dialogue, because that's part of the reason we do what we do. We want to actually get in the trenches with these conversations, and certainly Rajiv Malhotra stirring the pot, and Sir Jengde doing the same. So hopefully we get a chance
that's
to
why it's so important. As long as you're getting both sides and you're presenting both sides, and there's a discourse, rather than, again, where I stand. I hate to see these echo chambers just continue, and when nothing gets resolved, there's no discourse whatsoever. So I'm hoping that the Diya TV team could get that, especially during the time at the Harvard conference.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully we can put it together. And I think that's very, very important. I mean, what we see now with social media in particular is that you have people who just talk to their echo chambers, right? And so they don't get criticism. They don't accept criticism. They block folks that potentially can put out criticism on their thoughts. And then, nothing gets accomplished, right? They're just marching to their own beat. And this is true of the right and the left. And I don't know how that solves anything, how you get someone to consensus or at least compromise without actually having a direct discussion. But we'll see if this thing can be facilitated. We're going to try. And dialogue is what this show is all about here on Protected Speech as well. So, Jonathan, again, sticking your neck out once again.
It's been a long week, man. Looking forward to Thanksgiving, huh? What are you thankful for, man?
I'm looking forward to a couple of moments of downtime. I'm very thankful that we have this show, that we have this open dialogue now. I'm thankful for the team that we have as Diya's grown around the country, and thankful that everyone that I know near and dear is still kind of safe and sound. I mean, we've all been through a rough period for the last couple of years, and a lot of lives lost in America and globally. So maintain that health. That's hopefully the point, right? We just get together with our families and enjoy each and every moment we got here. So for Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. That's been another edition of Protected Speech. We'll see you again next time.